Dr. Naomi Carter strode through the gleaming halls of JFK International Airport, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floors. Dressed in a tailored navy blue pantsuit, she exuded quiet confidence. Her carry-on rolled smoothly behind her as she adjusted the strap of her designer handbag. Despite her calm demeanor, she was exhausted. Running an airline was no small feat, but today, she was looking forward to flying as a passenger for a change. The Horizon Airways VIP lounge was bustling with activity. Business executives murmured over last-minute emails, luxury travelers sipped on complimentary champagne, and airline staff moved swiftly to ensure everything ran seamlessly. Naomi approached the concierge desk, flashing her Black Diamond membership card. "Dr. Carter, welcome back," the attendant greeted warmly. "We've upgraded your seat to first class for this evening's flight to Los Angeles." Naomi nodded in appreciation and turned to take a seat in the lounge. That was when she heard it. "I don't understand why they let just anyone in here nowadays," a sharp voice cut through the low hum of conversation. Naomi glanced up to see a woman in her late 50s, her platinum blonde bob perfectly styled, her pearl necklace resting against an expensive cashmere sweater. The woman, Karen Whitmore, as the name on her Louis Vuitton luggage tag read, was glaring at Naomi with thinly veiled contempt. At first, Naomi ignored her. She had encountered women like this before, entitled, resentful, eager to enforce an unspoken hierarchy. It wasn't worth the energy, but Karen, clearly emboldened by Naomi's silence, took a step closer. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think you're in the wrong place. This lounge is for priority members only." Naomi lifted an eyebrow, giving Karen the briefest of glances before returning to her phone. She had long since learned that engaging with ignorance was rarely worth her time. Karen, however, wasn't used to being ignored. "I just don't see how certain people," she hesitated, eyes narrowing, "can afford first class these days. It's really disappointing." The room went quiet. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances, while others subtly reached for their phones, sensing an unfolding drama. Naomi exhaled slowly, placing her phone down. She turned fully to Karen, leveling her with a steady, unshaken gaze. "You seem very concerned about my travel plans. Perhaps you should worry about your own." Karen's lips pursed, as if she had just tasted something sour. "I'll have you know, I'm a loyal customer of this airline. My husband and I have been flying first class for years. Not that it's any of your business, but I worked hard for my place in this lounge." Naomi tilted her head, amused. "Is that so?" Karen huffed, sensing she was losing control of the situation. "I want to speak to a manager. This is unacceptable." Before Naomi could respond, Horizon Airways attendant approached with a polite but firm smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem," Karen snapped. "This woman is making me uncomfortable. She obviously doesn't belong here, and I don't see why she was upgraded to first class." The attendant's smile didn't waver. "Dr. Carter is one of our most valued passengers." Karen's face twisted in confusion. "Dr. Carter?" Naomi simply picked up her bag, standing gracefully. "That's right," she said, flashing the concierge a small smile. "And I think it's time to board." As she walked toward the gate, the lounge remained still, the weight of Karen's embarrassment hanging in the air. And the real turbulence? It was yet to come. The cabin of Flight HA-127 gleamed with sleek modernity, plush first-class seats, ambient lighting, and a quiet hum of luxury. Naomi Carter settled into her seat, 1A, adjusting the soft leather armrest. She took a deep breath, finally allowing herself to relax. If all went well, in a few hours, she'd be landing in Los Angeles, far away from the entitled ignorance she'd encountered in the lounge. Unfortunately, fate had other plans. A sharp voice broke the peace. "You have got to be kidding me." Naomi glanced up to see none other than Karen Whitmore, standing a few feet away, her manicured fingers gripping the headrest of seat 1B as if it personally offended her. Her expression was frozen in disbelief, her mouth slightly open in outrage. "There must be some mistake," Karen declared, turning to the nearest flight attendant. "I need another seat." I refused to sit next to her. A hush fell over the surrounding passengers. A few murmurs passed between them, a mix of amusement, discomfort, and anticipation. The flight attendant, a young woman named Olivia, blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Karen's face flushed with impatience. "I said I refused to sit next to this woman. I booked this flight expecting a certain level of class, and I don't see why I should have to suffer because of her presence." Naomi inhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral. She had encountered racism before, but the sheer audacity of Karen's behavior, so brazen, so entitled, was almost laughable. Olivia's face stiffened. "Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Carter is a priority member and a fully paying passenger. There is no seat reassignment available at this time." Karen scoffed. "Oh, I highly doubt that. I want to speak to the captain." Naomi let out a small chuckle, shaking her head. "You want to escalate this? Be my guest?" Karen turned sharply toward her. "Excuse me? I mean, if you really want to make a scene, go ahead," Naomi said, reclining slightly in her seat. "By all means, let's make a spectacle at 35,000 feet. Let's see how well that works out for you." Karen's jaw tightened. "You're insufferably arrogant." Naomi simply smiled. "No, I'm just used to dealing with people like you." A few passengers snickered softly. Even the businessman in seat 2C peeked over his newspaper, clearly invested in the unfolding drama. Before Karen could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" All eyes turned toward the approaching figure. A man in his early 50s, clad in a crisp Horizon Airways captain's uniform. His presence was commanding, his gaze sharp as he surveyed the situation. Karen immediately straightened. "Yes, Captain. This woman," she gestured wildly at Naomi, "is making me extremely uncomfortable. I demand to be moved." The captain's lips pressed into a thin line. He studied Naomi for a brief moment, then turned back to Karen. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think you're under a grave misunderstanding." Karen blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" The captain took a measured step forward. "Dr. Naomi Carter is not just a passenger on this flight. She is the owner of Horizon Airways." The cabin went utterly silent. Karen's face paled, her mouth opening slightly as if words had failed her. Naomi folded her hands in her lap, tilting her head slightly. "Still want to escalate this?" Karen's breath hitched. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Karen Whitmore's face drained of color as the weight of the captain's words settled over her like a leaden blanket. "She owns the airline." The first-class cabin remained eerily silent, save for the muffled hum of the engines. Naomi Carter, the very woman Karen had demanded be removed from her presence, was in fact the owner of Horizon Airways. Karen's fingers clenched around the pearl necklace she wore, as if holding on to it would somehow tether her to the illusion of superiority that had just been obliterated. That can't be right," she stammered, eyes darting between Naomi and the captain. "This must be some kind of joke." The captain's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried an unmistakable firmness. "I assure you, Mrs. Whitmore, it's not." A low murmur rippled through the first-class cabin. A businessman in seat 2C exchanged a knowing glance with a young woman scrolling through her phone in 3A. The tension in the air shifted, not just a moment of embarrassment, but a reckoning. Naomi, however, remained composed. She had seen women like Karen before, people who walked through life assuming their privilege was an unshakable foundation. And yet, here she was, teetering on the edge of humiliation at 35,000 feet. Karen's voice sharpened in desperation. "I don't care who she claims to be. This is unacceptable. I have been a loyal customer of this airline for years. I deserve respect." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Respect?" she echoed, arching a brow. "Like the kind you showed me when you demanded I be moved? Or when you decided I wasn't worthy of sitting next to you?" Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Naomi leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You see, Mrs. Whitmore, I built this airline on the belief that everyone deserves a seat at the table, or in this case on the plane. First class, economy, it doesn't matter. What matters is decency." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please, don't lecture me on decency." The captain's patience had clearly run thin. He glanced at Olivia, the flight attendant, who gave a subtle nod. "Mrs. Whitmore," the captain said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, "I'm afraid you have two options. You can remain in your assigned seat and complete the flight without further incident, or—" He paused, letting the unspoken alternative settle in the air like an impending storm. "You can disembark at our next emergency landing and find another way to your destination." Karen's face twisted in horror. "You can't be serious?" Naomi didn't flinch. "Oh, I assure you he is." "See, the irony of all this, Mrs. Whitmore, is that you are the one causing the disruption. And in my airline, we don't tolerate disruption." A small chuckle erupted from seat 2C. Karen spun around, eyes burning with fury, but she was met with nothing but disinterest from the surrounding passengers. No one was on her side. Karen swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had no choice but to sit down and stay quiet. For the first time in her life, Karen Whitmore was powerless. Karen Whitmore sat frozen in her seat, her lips pressed into a thin, pale line. The weight of humiliation bore down on her shoulders, pressing her spine into the plush leather of the first-class seat. Every fiber of her being wanted to scream, to fight back, to reclaim the authority she believed she deserved. But for the first time in her life, she was outmatched. Naomi Carter was untouchable. The cabin, once a stage for Karen's misplaced outrage, now hummed with a quiet, electrified tension. The other passengers had all but dismissed her presence, their interest shifting back to their books, their in-flight entertainment, their conversations. She was no longer the center of attention, no longer the force that dictated the room. She was insignificant. Naomi, poised and unwavering, turned her attention back to her book, flipping a page with the ease of a woman entirely unbothered. She had made her point without raising her voice, without breaking her composure. Power wasn't about volume, it was about control. Karen clenched her fists in her lap, her knuckles white. She needed an out. Something, anything, to salvage the shreds of her dignity. She cleared her throat, forcing herself to sit up straighter. I demand compensation," she blurted out, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "I've been humiliated, mistreated. I'll be contacting your corporate office the moment we land." Naomi barely glanced up from her book. "Oh, I'd be happy to connect you," she said coolly, turning another page. "Would you like the CEO's direct line?" Karen's mouth snapped shut. That was the moment she realized there was nowhere left to run. The captain, who had remained nearby, sighed and checked his watch. "Mrs. Whitmore, I strongly suggest you make yourself comfortable for the remainder of the flight." His tone was polite but firm. There was no room for debate. Karen's body sagged into the seat, a bitter taste settling on her tongue. The remainder of the flight passed in a blur of quiet whispers and stolen glances. The moment Naomi had stood her ground, the atmosphere had shifted. Passengers who once might have ignored Karen's behavior now recognized it for what it was: ugly, outdated entitlement. By the time the plane began its descent, Karen's fury had simmered into something different. It wasn't anger anymore. It was shame. As they taxied to the gate, Naomi finally turned her. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her voice measured, "you don't have to like me. You don't have to respect me, but the next time you assume someone doesn't belong, ask yourself if it's because they truly don't or because you simply can't imagine them in that space. Karen had no response as the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began gathering their belongings. Naomi rose gracefully, tucking her book into her bag. She offered a polite smile to the flight attendants before making her way down the aisle, her head high, her presence undeniable. And as Karen watched her disappear into the terminal, she realized that this flight, this moment, was something she would never forget. Because for the first time in her life, Karen Whitmore had been grounded. Karen Whitmore shuffled through the airport terminal, her heels clicking against the polished floor with less confidence than before. The weight of humiliation still clung to her, a suffocating presence she couldn't shake. She had spent years moving through the world unchallenged, her privilege smoothing over any rough edges. But today had been different. Today, she had been put in her place. She glanced at her phone, her fingers itching to call someone, her husband, her lawyer, the airline's corporate office, anyone who would tell her she was right. But deep down, she already knew the truth. No one would take her side. Not this time. Across the terminal, Naomi Carter walked with the effortless confidence of a woman who owned the space she occupied. Because, quite literally, she did. Flanked by two senior executives of Horizon Airways, she exuded an air of authority that made heads turn. "Ms. Carter," one of the executives said, "we've already sent out a company-wide memo reinforcing the protocol for incidents like this. Moving forward, any form of discrimination against our staff, our customers, or our leadership will result in immediate action." Naomi nodded, pleased but unsurprised. "Good," she said. "If Horizon Airways is going to stand for something, it needs to stand for inclusion and accountability." As they walked, a few employees discreetly nodded at Naomi in silent solidarity. Word of what had happened on the flight had already spread. She had done something that many before her had only dreamed of. She had taken on the system and won. Karen, still lingering near the baggage claim, caught sight of the interaction. A familiar heat of resentment burned in her chest, but it was muted now, tangled with something unfamiliar. Was it guilt? Was it regret? She wanted to believe that Naomi had humiliated her out of malice, that she had been waiting for an opportunity to put someone like Karen in their place. But the truth was, Naomi hadn't needed to prove anything. She had simply refused to be disrespected. And that, more than anything, was what unsettled Karen the most. A few feet away, a television screen played a breaking news segment. The headline read, "CEO of Horizon Airways defends herself against racist incident mid-flight. How one woman stood her ground and changed the conversation." Karen swallowed hard. Her face wasn't on the screen, but it didn't have to be. People would know. People would talk. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted the attention. Naomi, sensing the stare, turned slightly and met Karen's eyes across the terminal. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. Instead, she offered a slow, knowing nod, one that said, "I see you. I hope you see yourself, too." Karen looked away first. As Naomi exited the terminal, stepping into the sleek black car waiting for her, she exhaled deeply. It wasn't about winning. It had never been about that. It was about standing firm, about making sure the next woman who looked like her didn't have to fight this same battle. And as the car pulled away, Naomi knew one thing for certain. Some people would never change, but the world around them, that was changing every single day,